The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. In the center of the mahogany table sat the Sterling family, vultures in designer black, waiting to pick the carcass of the empire clean. And then there was Eleanor, sitting in the far corner, hands folded in her lap. She was the invisible woman, the trophy wife. The mistake. They didn't even pour her a glass of water. They smirked, checking their watches, convinced she would be walking out with a suitcase of clothes and nothing else. But when the lawyer, Mr. Harrison Thorne, cleared his throat and read the final clause, the air didn't just leave the room. It was sucked out by the sheer force of a betrayal no one saw coming. They thought Eleanor was the sheep. They forgot that the shepherd leaves the flock to the one who actually watches over them. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to wash away the sins of the Sterling family, and failing miserably. It was October 14th, the day they buried Arthur Sterling. Arthur was a titan, a man whose name was stamped on steel mills, shipping containers, and half the skyscrapers in downtown Manhattan. He was 82 when his heart finally gave out, leaving behind a legacy worth billions, a bitter ex-wife, 2 greedy children, and Eleanor. Eleanor Sterling stood by the graveside, the mud creeping up the heels of her modest black pumps. She was 34 years old, 48 years Arthur's junior. To the tabloids, she was the nurse-turned-duchess. To Arthur's children, she was simply the leech. She held a single white rose. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She wasn't crying hysterically like Victoria, Arthur's daughter, who was currently sobbing into a handkerchief that looked dry. Eleanor's grief was a quiet, imploding thing. She had lost her best friend. "Look at her," Sebastian whispered to Victoria. Sebastian was the eldest, 45, with his father's jawline but none of his father's spine. He checked his Rolex, impatient. "She's acting the part well. I give her that." She's wondering how long she has to wait before she can cash the check and go back to the trailer park she crawled out of. Victoria hissed back, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. "I hope Harrison has the eviction notice ready for the manor. I want her out by Friday. I'm hosting the gala there next month." Standing a few feet away was Beatrice, Arthur's first wife. She had been divorced from him for 20 years, but still carried herself as the matriarch. She wore a fur coat, despite the damp weather, and stared at Eleanor with a hatred that could peel paint. "Don't worry, darlings," Beatrice murmured, stepping between her children. The prenup was ironclad. Arthur might have been senile in the end, falling for a pretty face and a soft touch, but he wasn't stupid with his money. She gets a stipend for a year, maybe the Lexus, and that's it. The empire belongs to the bloodline. Eleanor heard them. The wind carried their whispers, but she didn't react. She was used to it. For the 5 years she had been married to Arthur, she had been invisible in every room except the one Arthur was in. She stepped forward, placing the rose on the mahogany casket. "Rest now, Arthur," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "It's done." As she turned to leave, Sebastian stepped into a path. He towered over her, smelling of expensive scotch and arrogance. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We'll be heading to the reading at Thorne & Associates immediately. You are invited. Of course, if you'd rather go pack, we understand." Eleanor looked up at him. Her expression was unreadable. "I'll be there, Sebastian. Arthur asked me to be." "Arthur asked a lot of things when he was medicated," Victoria chimed in, linking arms with her brother. "Don't expect a seat at the head of the table." Eleanor walked past them toward the waiting black sedan. She didn't tell them that she wasn't worried about the seat. She was worried about what Arthur had done. She knew the man better than anyone, and she knew that his final act wasn't going to be a peaceful transition of power. It was going to be a lesson. The offices of Thorne and Associates were located on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center. The conference room was a vast expanse of glass and polished wood, offering a panoramic view of the city Arthur had helped build. Mr. Harrison Thorne sat at the head of the table. He was a man of few words, a legal shark who had served Arthur for 40 years. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and watched the family file in. Sebastian took the seat to Thorne's immediate right, loosening his tie. "Let's get this over with, Harrison. I have a board meeting in Tokyo to prepare for. The stock dipped 4% this morning upon the news. I need to stabilize the narrative." "The narrative," Thorne repeated, his voice dry. "Yeah, Sebastian. Always the showman." Victoria sat next to him, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Beatrice took the seat opposite them, crossing her legs. "Is the staff getting anything? I don't want to deal with weeping maids." "All handled," Thorne said. Finally, Eleanor entered. She had removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She hesitated at the door. "Sit anywhere, Eleanor," Sebastian said, gesturing to a folding metal chair placed against the wall, away from the main table. "We seem to be short one leather chair. You don't mind, do you?" It was a petty power play. There were plenty of chairs. They had just removed one. Eleanor didn't complain. She sat on the metal chair, her posture perfect, her hands clasped over her handbag. "Very well," Thorne said, opening a thick leather binder. "I will skip the preamble. Arthur was of sound mind and body when this last will and testament was amended 6 months ago." "Amended?" Beatrice sat up straighter. "He didn't tell us about an amendment." "Arthur didn't tell you a lot of things," Thorne said, his eyes flashing. "Let us begin." Thorne began to read the standard legalities. The mood in the room was tense. Sebastian tapped his pen on the table. Victoria scrolled on her phone under the table. "To my loyal staff." Thorne listed generous sums. 10,000 for the gardener, 50,000 for the cook, 100,000 for his driver of 30 years. "Touching," Victoria muttered. "Can we get to the assets? The properties? The holding company?" Thorne looked over his glasses at her. "Patience, Victoria. To my first wife, Beatrice," Thorne read. Beatrice smirked, smoothing her skirt. "Finally. I leave the sum of $1. The room went dead silent. Beatrice froze. "Excuse me?" $1, Thorne repeated clearly. Arthur's note reads, "Because you never spent a dime of your own money while we were married, I'm giving you the first one you'll ever earn. Frame it." Sebastian choked back a cough that might have been a laugh until he saw his mother's face turning a violent shade of purple. "This is outrageous," Beatrice screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "I built that company with him in the early days. I hosted the dinners. I raised his children." "You raised nannies who raised his children," Thorne corrected calmly. "And the divorce settlement 20 years ago gave you $50 million. Arthur felt that was sufficient." Beatrice sank back into her chair, trembling with rage. Eleanor in the corner didn't smile. She knew Arthur's bitterness toward Beatrice was deep, but hearing it out loud was painful. "Now," Thorne continued, turning the page, "to my daughter Victoria." Victoria straightened up, pushing her hair back. "Okay, here we go. To Victoria, I leave the Sterling Vineyard in Napa Valley, the Paris apartment on Avenue Montaigne, and a monthly allowance of $15,000. Victoria blinked. "Wait, the vineyard? That place is a money pit. It hasn't turned a profit in 5 years. And 15,000? Harrison, my driver costs $6,000 a month. Is this a joke? Where are the stocks? The bonds? The vineyard is yours, Victoria, Thorne said. Arthur noted that since you enjoy wine so much, perhaps you should learn how to make it. As for the allowance, it is contingent on you maintaining sobriety for 6 consecutive months. Failed drug tests will result in a suspension of payments. Victoria gasped, her face paling. He can't put that in a public document. It is a private will, Victoria, unless you contest it, in which case it becomes public record. Do you want to contest it? Victoria shut her mouth, sinking low in her chair. Sebastian leaned forward, a smug grin spreading across his face. Well, that leaves the lion's share, doesn't it? The Sterling Global Group, the shipping, the tech, the real estate portfolio. He looked at Eleanor in the corner. Sorry, sweetie. Looks like the old man finally realized blood is thicker than water. Thorne turned the page slowly. He took a sip of water. To my son, Sebastian, Thorne read. Sebastian buttoned his suit jacket, ready to stand and shake Thorne's hand. I leave the entirety of my vintage car collection, valued at approximately $40 million. Sebastian paused. Okay. Good start. And, Thorne continued, I leave you the title of CEO of Sterling Global, subject to the approval of the board of directors. I am the board of directors, Sebastian laughed. I control the voting shares, or I will, once you transfer them. I haven't finished, Thorne said sharply. To Sebastian, I also leave the debt associated with the disastrous Project Icarus expansion in Dubai. Sebastian's face went grey. What? That project is 200 million in the red. That was Arthur's idea. Arthur's note says, it was your idea, son. You forged my signature on the approval documents because you thought I was too old to notice. I noticed. Now you can pay for it. Sebastian stood up, his chair flying back. That's a lie. This is insane. If I take the debt, I'm bankrupt. The cars won't cover a quarter of that. Then I suggest you sell the cars, Sebastian, and work very hard. Where are the shares? Sebastian screamed. The voting trust, the 51% majority stake in Sterling Global. Who gets the company? Beatrice, Victoria, and Sebastian all looked at Thorne. Arthur didn't leave the company to any of you, Thorne said quietly. Slowly, 3 heads turned toward the corner of the room, toward the metal folding chair. Eleanor was looking at her hands. No, Sebastian whispered. No, that's impossible. She's a nurse. She doesn't know a balance sheet from a grocery list. She's a gold digger, Beatrice shrieked. She manipulated him. Thorne slammed the binder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Sit down, Sebastian, Thorne barked. I have not read the final clause. Sebastian sat, breathing heavily. The air in the room was toxic. To my wife, Eleanor, Thorne began, his voice softening for the first time. Eleanor looked up. Her eyes met Thorne's. I leave the Sterling Manor. I leave the liquid cash accounts in the Cayman Islands and Zurich, totaling $400 million. Victoria let out a strangled sob. And, Thorne continued, I leave the 51% controlling interest in Sterling Global Group, giving her absolute authority over the board, the CEO, and the future of the company. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had landed, but hadn't detonated yet. Then Sebastian laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. You're joking. You have to be. She can't run the company. She'll destroy it in a week. The shareholders will revolt. Actually, Thorne said, pulling a separate, thinner envelope from his briefcase. Arthur anticipated you would say that, which is why he left this letter. He wanted me to read it only if his judgment was questioned. Thorne looked at Eleanor. May I? Eleanor nodded slowly. Read it, Harrison. Thorne opened the letter. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit 40 floors below. Harrison Thorne held the cream-colored envelope with the steady hands of a man who had seen everything. Sebastian was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles were white. Victoria was staring at Eleanor as if she were a poisonous insect that had just landed on her dinner plate. Thorne cleared his throat and began to read Arthur's voice. "To my family," the letter began. "If Harrison is reading this, it means Sebastian has claimed he is the only one fit to run the company. Victoria has complained about her allowance, and Beatrice has likely insulted Eleanor's background. I am predictable, I know. But so are you." Sebastian's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "You all see Eleanor as the nurse I hired 5 years ago. You see a woman from a small town in Ohio with no pedigree, no connections, and no blood right to the Sterling name. You saw her quiet demeanor and mistook it for weakness. You saw her silence and mistook it for ignorance. But that is because none of you ever asked her a single question." Thorne paused, letting the words sink in. Eleanor remained still, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall, her face a mask of composed grief. "You didn't ask her about her master's degree in economics from the University of Chicago, which she obtained on a full scholarship while working nights. You didn't ask her why she left the financial sector to become a private palliative care nurse, because she lost her own father to cancer and wanted to help others die with the dignity he was denied. And you certainly didn't ask her what we did during those long nights when my insomnia kept me awake." Thorne looked up over his glasses. "You thought she was reading me bedtime stories?" "No. For the last 3 years, Eleanor has been my eyes and ears. When my sight began to fail, she read the board minutes to me. When my hands shook too much to hold a pen, she took dictation on the restructuring plans. When Sebastian proposed the Project Icarus deal in Dubai, it was Eleanor who flagged the discrepancies in the environmental impact reports. It was Eleanor who noticed that Sebastian was funneling kickbacks through a shell company in the Seychelles." Sebastian leapt to his feet, overturning his chair. "That's a lie. That's slander. I'll sue the estate." "Sit down, Sebastian," Thorne said, his voice like a whip. "Arthur attached the bank transfer records to the appendix of this will. It's irrefutable." Sebastian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the heat. He slowly sank back down, not into his chair, but onto the edge of the table, deflated. Thorne continued reading. "Eleanor knows the company better than any of you. She knows the employees. She knows the vision. She is the only one who listened to me when I talked about the future, rather than just waiting for me to become the past. I am not leaving my company to my wife out of sentimentality. I am leaving it to her, because she is the only one competent enough to save it from you." So, the letter concluded, the 51% stake is hers. If you want to keep your jobs, your titles, and your lifestyles, I suggest you learn to do something you have never done before. Show her some respect. Goodbye. Arthur. Thorne folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. He slid it across the polished table toward the metal folding chair in the corner. "It is yours, Mrs. Sterling," Thorne said respectfully. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the storm broke. "This is undue influence," Beatrice hissed, standing up and wrapping her fur coat tight around her. "She drugged him. She manipulated a dying man. We will contest this in probate court. We will tie this up for years, Harrison. She won't see a dime." "You can try, Beatrice," Thorne said calmly. But Arthur videotaped the signing of the will. His doctors signed affidavits regarding his mental clarity. And if you contest the will, the no contest clause triggers, and you lose even the $1. Is that a risk you want to take? Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked at Sebastian, waiting for him to do something, to fix it. But Sebastian was staring at the floor, his mind racing through the implications of the Dubai revelation. If that got out, he wasn't just broke, he was going to prison. Victoria was the first to break ranks. She looked at the vineyard deed in front of her, then at Eleanor. I have to go, she stammered. I have a flight to Napa. I need to check the grapes. She grabbed her paperwork and fled the room without looking back. She was selfish, but she was a survivor. She knew when the ship was sinking. Beatrice glared at Eleanor with pure venom. You will never be one of us. You can wear the name, you can live in the house, but you will always be the help. Remember that. She marched out, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Sebastian was the last to leave. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with trembling hands. He walked over to where Eleanor sat. He loomed over her, trying to summon the intimidation tactics that had worked his whole life. You think you've won? Sebastian whispered, his voice low and dangerous. But running a conglomerate isn't reading a spreadsheet, Eleanor. It's war. The board answers to me. The shareholders know me. You walk into that building tomorrow, and they will eat you alive. I give you a week before you come begging me to buy you out for pennies on the dollar. Eleanor finally looked up. Her blue eyes were dry and hard as diamonds. I'll see you at the 9 a.m. board meeting, Sebastian, she said softly. Don't be late. I hate tardiness. Sebastian sneered, spun on his heel, and stormed out. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving Eleanor alone with Harrison Thorne. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It wasn't heavy. It was charged. Eleanor let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping slightly. He really did it, she whispered. I told him not to. I told him it would start a war. He knew you were the only one who could win it, Thorne said, standing up and offering her his hand. Arthur was a gambler, Eleanor, but he never bet on a losing horse. Eleanor took his hand and stood up. She smoothed the skirt of her simple black dress. Harrison? Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Call security at the manor. Beatrice is going to try to steal the silverware before she leaves, and call the locksmiths. I want the locks changed at the corporate headquarters tonight. Sebastian's keycard is to be deactivated immediately. Thorne smiled, a rare, genuine smile. I already gave the order 10 minutes ago. Eleanor nodded, walking toward the window to look out at the Seattle skyline. The rain had stopped. Then let's get to work. The next morning, the headlines were screaming. The nurse who inherited an empire. Sterling heirs cut out. Widow takes all. From bedpans to boardrooms, who is Eleanor Sterling? The paparazzi were swarmed outside the gates of Sterling Manor. Helicopters buzzed overhead. But Eleanor was already gone. She had left at 5 a.m., taking the back service road in Arthur's old armored Mercedes. At the Sterling Global headquarters, the atmosphere was toxic. Sebastian had arrived at 6 a.m., fueled by caffeine and panic. He was in his office on the 50th floor, shredding documents. The hum of the industrial shredder was the soundtrack to his unraveling. He had spent the night calling board members. She's incompetent, he had told them. She's a gold digger. If we let her take the chair, the stock tanks. We need a vote of no confidence immediately. Most of the board was old, conservative, and loyal to the Sterling name, which, to them, meant Sebastian. They agreed to back him. They would let her walk in, humiliate her, and force her to resign as chairwoman in exchange for a payout. It was a classic corporate ambush. At 8:55 a.m., the elevator doors to the executive floor opened. Sebastian stood at the head of the massive glass conference table. 12 board members sat around him, mostly grey-haired men in expensive suits. They murmured amongst themselves, checking their phones, laughing quietly about the situation. "She's probably lost in the lobby," one board member, a man named Gerald Vance, chuckled. "Does she even know which button to push?" "Let's just get this over with," Sebastian said, checking his watch. "We present the motion to remove her as chair due to lack of qualification. We offer her $10 million to walk away. She takes it. We go to lunch." $10 million is generous," Vance noted. At 9:30 a.m. exactly, the double doors swung open. The room went silent. Eleanor Sterling walked in. She wasn't wearing the frumpy cardigan they had seen her in at the hospital visits. She was wearing a tailored navy power suit that cost more than Sebastian's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She carried nothing but a slim leather portfolio. Flanking her were 2 large men in dark suits, private security, and Harrison Thorne. "Good morning, gentlemen," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it projected clearly to the back of the room. She walked to the head of the table. Sebastian was standing there, occupying the chair's seat. "You're in my seat, Sebastian," Eleanor said. Sebastian smiled, a cruel, patronizing twist of his lips. "This seat is for the CEO and chairman of the board, Eleanor. You might own the stock, but until this board ratifies your position, you're just a guest. Why don't you sit over there?" He pointed to a side chair. Gerald Vance cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sterling, in light of the unusual circumstances, the board feels it would be best if we discussed a transition package. We prepared a generous offer." "Mr. Vance," Eleanor interrupted, not even looking at him. "You've been on this board for 12 years. In that time, you've approved 3 mergers that failed, resulting in a loss of $400 million. You also missed 6 of the last 10 quarterly review meetings because you were, I believe, golfing in Scotland." Vance's mouth snapped shut, his face flushed red. Eleanor turned her gaze back to Sebastian. "I am not here to negotiate a package, and I am not here to be ratified. I am the majority shareholder. I am the ratification." She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. "Now, Sebastian, move." "Or what?" Sebastian challenged, crossing his arms. "You'll call the nurse station." "No," Eleanor said. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the portfolio. "Or I will release the forensic accounting audit of the Dubai Icarus's project to the SEC. I have it right here. It details the wire transfers to your personal accounts in the Seychelles. It details the bribes paid to local officials. It details the forgery of Arthur's signature." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The other board members froze. They knew Sebastian had lost money in Dubai, but they didn't know about the fraud. If that came out, the company would face federal investigation. Their stock options would be worthless. They would all be deposed. Sebastian stared at the paper. His bravado evaporated. He looked around the room for support, but the board members were suddenly very interested in their notepads. No one wanted to be associated with federal fraud. "You wouldn't," Sebastian hissed. "It would destroy the company's stock. You'd lose millions, too." "I can afford to lose millions to clean out the rot," Eleanor said coldly. "Can you afford to go to federal prison, Sebastian?" A long, agonizing silence stretched between them. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer strikes. Slowly, humiliatingly, Sebastian uncrossed his arms. He picked up his pen. He stepped away from the head of the table. Eleanor didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stepped forward and sat down in the leather chair. It was too big for her, physically, but she filled the space with an intensity that made everyone else feel small. She looked down the long table. "Now," she said, opening a file. "Item 1. The immediate termination of the Chief Executive Officer, Sebastian Sterling, for cause." "You can't do that!" Sebastian screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the legacy. This is my name on the building." "All in favor?" Eleanor asked the room. She raised her hand. Harrison Thorne raised his hand. Gerald Vance, sweating profusely and looking terrified of the woman who knew about his golf trips, slowly raised his hand. One by one, the other board members raised their hands. They were sharks, and they had just realized there was a bigger predator in the water. They turned on Sebastian instantly. "Motion carried," Eleanor said. She looked at the security guards. "Please escort Mr. Sterling from the building. He is to take nothing with him. No laptop, no phone, no files." "This isn't over!" Sebastian shouted as the guards grabbed his arms. He was dragging his feet as they hauled him toward the door. "You think you can run this? You're nothing! I'll kill you! I'll kill you for this!" His threats echoed down the hallway until the doors swung shut. Eleanor took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly beneath the table, but her face remained made of stone. "Item 2, she said, addressing the stunned room. "We are going to audit every department. If you have been skimming, if you have been lazy, if you have been riding Arthur's coattails, your time is up. We are going to rebuild Sterling Global, and we are going to start by liquidating the vintage car collection to pay off the Dubai debt." A murmur of shock went through the room. "Any objections?" Eleanor asked. There were none. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the time Eleanor walked out of the boardroom, she was exhausted. Her adrenaline was crashing. She walked into the CEO's office, her office now, and closed the door. She slumped against the heavy wood, closing her eyes. She had done it. She had survived the first wave. But as she walked over to the massive desk, she noticed something. Arthur's private safe, hidden behind the painting of the original Sterling steel mill, was slightly ajar. Eleanor frowned. Sebastian hadn't had the combination. Only Arthur and Eleanor knew it. She walked over and pulled the painting back. The safe was empty. Arthur kept a specific ledger in there, a black book. It wasn't about money. It was about people. It contained the blackmail material he had gathered over 50 years on politicians, judges, and rivals. It was the insurance policy that kept the Sterling family untouchable. It was gone. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She grabbed the desk phone and dialed security. "Did Sebastian enter this office before the meeting?" "Yes, Miss Sterling," the guard replied. "He was in there for about 20 minutes around 7 a.m. Eleanor hung up. Sebastian didn't just want the company, he wanted revenge. And if he had the black book, he didn't need the CEO title to destroy her. He could burn the entire city down. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She picked it up. "Hello?" "Check your email, nurse." Sebastian's voice rasped. He sounded drunk or manic or both. "You took my chair, so I took your leverage. Let's see how you handle the sharks when you're bleeding." Eleanor opened her laptop. An email from Sebastian had just arrived. The subject line read, "The truth about Arthur's death." She clicked it open. It wasn't a file from the safe. It was a video file, dated the night Arthur died. Eleanor clicked play, and her heart stopped. The video on Eleanor's laptop screen was grainy, taken from a hidden security camera installed in the corner of Arthur's bedroom ceiling, a camera Arthur had installed years ago due to paranoia about staff theft, and one he had promised Eleanor was deactivated. The timestamp read October 11th 11:47 p.m. 2 days before he died, the footage showed Arthur lying in his hospital bed, set up in the master suite. He was writhing, his frail body convulsing with pain that the standard morphine drip couldn't touch. The audio was faint, but his groans were gut-wrenching. Eleanor entered the frame. She was wearing her nightgown. She sat by the bed, holding his hand, stroking his hair. You could see her crying. Then Arthur grabbed her wrist. His voice, raspy and desperate, cut through the static. "Ellie, please, no more. I can't do another night. Help me, like you promised." Eleanor shook her head frantically in the video. "Arthur, I can't. The doctor said, damn the doctors. They aren't dying in this bed. Ellie, if you love me, end it. The big vial in the safe. Please." The video showed Eleanor hesitating for agonizing minutes. She paced the room. She wept. Finally, broken by his suffering, she walked out of frame. She returned a moment later, holding a small glass vial and a syringe. With trembling hands, she injected the contents into his IV port. Arthur's thrashing slowed. His breathing hitched, then smoothed out. He looked at Eleanor with profound relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "My good girl." 10 minutes later, he was asleep. 2 days later, his heart stopped. The video ended. Eleanor stared at a black screen, tears streaming down her face, just as they had that night. It wasn't murder. It was an act of supreme love. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. But to the outside world, to a prosecutor, it was a young wife giving her rich, elderly husband a lethal injection days before inheriting billions. Her phone rang again. "Sebastian, did you like the home movie?" Sebastian gloated. His voice was slurred. He was celebrating prematurely. "I found the camera feed back up in the server room before your goons threw me out. Amazing what you find when you look." "You know what that was, Sebastian," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. He was in agony. "He begged me." "I know what it looks like, Eleanor. It looks like manslaughter at best, murder one at worst. The angel of death nurse. The tabloids will eat it up. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison wearing an orange jumpsuit that definitely isn't tailored." "What do you want?" Eleanor whispered. "I want my company back, all of it. You resign tomorrow. You name me CEO and chairman. You sign over the 51% stake to a trust controlled by me. You take the Cayman money and you disappear to an island where no one knows your name. You do that, the video gets deleted." "And the black book?" Eleanor asked, gripping the desk. "The ledger you stole from the safe." Sebastian laughed darkly. "That's my insurance policy, in case you get buyer's remorse later. That stays with me. You have until noon tomorrow to announce your resignation. If not, I send the video to the district attorney at 12:01 p.m. TikTok, nurse." He hung up. Eleanor felt like the walls of the massive corner office were closing in on her. She had outsmarted them financially, but she hadn't prepared for this level of viciousness. Sebastian was willing to burn his father's memory to the ground to destroy her. She needed Harrison Thorne, but could she tell him? This was a felony. If she told him, he might be obligated to report her to protect the firm. She was truly, completely alone. She spent the next hour watching the rain hit the windows. She imagined prison. She imagined Arthur's legacy being run into the ground by Sebastian. She thought about the promise she made to Arthur to protect what he built. Arthur was a gambler, Eleanor, but he never bet on a losing horse. Harrison's words echoed in her mind. Arthur knew Sebastian was venomous. He wouldn't have left Eleanor defenseless. He must have known about the camera. Suddenly, Eleanor stood up. The safe. Sebastian had cleaned out the black book and the cash Arthur kept there. But Arthur had a false bottom installed in that safe 3 years ago. Eleanor remembered because the installer had flirted with her, and Arthur had fired him on the spot. She ran to the safe. It was empty, the velvet lining torn where Sebastian had roughly grabbed the contents. She felt along the bottom edge until her fingernail caught a tiny groove. She pulled up. A thin metal plate lifted. Underneath lay a small digital voice recorder. Eleanor grabbed it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed play. It was Arthur's voice, strong and clear, dated October 10th, the day before the injection. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon Sterling. Being of sound mind, I am making this recording to absolve my wife, Eleanor, of any guilt for the actions I am about to force her to take." Eleanor sobbed in relief, clutching the recorder to her chest. He had known. He had protected her, even from the grave. But her relief was short-lived. This recorder proved her innocence regarding the death, but it didn't solve the problem of Sebastian having the black book. The black book contained decades of dirt, senators who took bribes, EPA inspectors who looked the other way, judges who fixed cases for Sterling Global. If Sebastian released that information, the company would face a tidal wave of federal investigations and lawsuits that would bankrupt it faster than any bad business deal. Sebastian was holding a grenade, and he was crazy enough to pull the pin just to watch the explosion. Eleanor wiped her tears. She had the shield. Now she needed a sword. She picked up her office phone and dialed an internal extension. "Thomas," she said, when the deep voice answered. It was Arthur's driver, the man who had received $100,000 in the will. He was an ex-Marine, fiercely loyal to Arthur, and by extension, to the woman Arthur loved. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. How can I help?" "I need you to bring the car around, the nondescript one, and Thomas, bring your service piece. We have a pest problem to take care of." Sebastian was holed up in the penthouse suite of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. He had been drinking champagne since noon, alternating between euphoria and blind panic. He had the black book open on the coffee table. It was a literal black leather notebook, worn from years of Arthur's handling. The entries were in Arthur's neat cursive script, detailed codes for people and their sins. Reading it made Sebastian feel sick. His father hadn't just been a businessman, he had been a puppet master. Sebastian realized how little he actually knew about how the empire ran. His phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "You win. I can't go to prison. I have the resignation papers drafted. Meet me to sign. But not at the office. I won't give you the satisfaction of seeing me crawl there." Sebastian smiled nastily. He texted back, "My hotel suite. Now. Come alone." "Okay," she replied. Sebastian poured another drink. He felt like a king. He had crushed her. 30 minutes later, a timid knock sounded at the door. Sebastian opened it. Eleanor stood there, wearing a trench coat, looking small and defeated. Her eyes were downcast. "Come in, widow," Sebastian sneered, stepping aside. "Welcome to the transfer of power." Eleanor walked into the opulent suite. She saw the open black book on the coffee table. She saw the empty champagne bottles. "Where are the papers?" Sebastian demanded, closing the door. "In my bag," Eleanor said quietly. She reached into her large tote bag. Sebastian watched her, swaying slightly. "You know, you almost pulled it off. If you hadn't tried to play hardball at the board meeting, I might have let you keep the house. Now? I'm going to evict you on Christmas Eve just for the fun of it." "You're a cruel man, Sebastian," Eleanor said, her hand still inside her bag. "I'm my father's son," he retorted. "Now give me the damn papers." "Actually," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly changing, dropping the timid facade and becoming cold as steel. "I didn't bring papers. I brought Thomas." Before Sebastian could process the name, the door to the adjoining bedroom, which Sebastian hadn't bothered to check, burst open. Thomas, 6'4" of muscle and stone-faced resolve, stepped out. He wasn't holding his gun, but the way he held his fists made it clear he didn't need one. "What the hell?" Sebastian stumbled back, knocking over an end table. "Security! Help!" "No one is coming, Sebastian," Eleanor said calmly, pulling the digital recorder from her bag instead of papers. "I bought out the floor." "You set me up! You can't do this! I have the video!" "The video where I fulfilled a dying man's wish?" Eleanor pressed play on the recorder. Arthur's voice filled the room, clearly stating his intent to end his own life, and his instruction for Eleanor to assist him, absolving her of all guilt. Sebastian's face went white. "No, that's fake." "It's authenticated by time and date stamps within the device," Eleanor said. "The district attorney might still frown on assisted suicide, but with this tape, no jury in the world will convict me of murder. At worst, I get probation and a sob story movie made about me. Your leverage is gone." Sebastian looked wildly at the coffee table, at the black book. He lunged for it. Thomas moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He intercepted Sebastian, grabbing him by the collar of his expensive shirt and slamming him against the wall. It wasn't a gentle shove. It was a wall-rattling impact that knocked the wind out of Sebastian. Thomas held him there, feet dangling slightly off the floor. Sebastian gasped, terrified. Eleanor walked over to the coffee table. She picked up the black book. It felt heavy in her hands, the weight of 50 years of corruption. She looked at Sebastian, pinned to the wall like a butterfly in a display case. "You were going to use this," she said, tapping the cover. "You were going to threaten Senator Davies. You were going to expose the EPA bribes for the Ohio plant. Did you even think about what would happen? The federal investigations wouldn't just hit the company, Sebastian. They would hit you. You signed the last 3 EPA compliance reports. You would have sent yourself to prison just to hurt me." Sebastian wheezed. "Please, Eleanor, we're family." "No," Eleanor said. "We're really not. Beatrice made sure I knew that yesterday." She nodded to Thomas. "Let him go." Thomas released him. Sebastian slid down the wall, coughing, rubbing his neck. "What are you going to do?" Sebastian asked, his voice trembling. Eleanor walked to the fireplace in the corner of the suite, where a gas fire was gently burning. "Arthur built an empire on leverage," Eleanor said, staring into the flames. "He kept this book because he was afraid. He was afraid that if he didn't have a gun to everyone's head, they would take what was his." She turned to face Sebastian. "I'm not afraid, Sebastian, and I don't want to run a company that relies on this." She tossed the black book into the fire. Sebastian screamed. "No! Are you insane? That's worth billions! That's the real power!" He scrambled toward the fireplace, burning his hands trying to retrieve it, but the dry pages caught instantly. The flames licked up around the leather cover, curling the pages filled with decades of secrets. Eleanor watched it burn. It's over. The era of Arthur Sterling's shadow games is over. The company is going to run clean from now on, or it's going to fail. But it will be honest. She looked down at Sebastian, who was kneeling on the hearth, staring in horror at the ashes of his last hope for dominance. "You have 2 choices, Sebastian," Eleanor said coldly. 1. I release the audit of your Dubai fraud to the FBI tomorrow. You go to prison for 10 years. Sebastian looked up, tears mixing with the soot on his face. Or 2, Eleanor continued. You check yourself into the rehab facility in Arizona that I've already paid for. You stay there for 6 months. You get clean. When you get out, if you are sober, I will give you a mid-level management position in the logistics division in Omaha. You will earn a salary of $80,000 a year, and you will learn how to actually work. Sebastian stared at her. Omaha. $80,000. It was a fate worse than death for a sterling. Those are the terms, Eleanor said, motioning for Thomas to open the door. The car to Arizona is downstairs. It leaves in 10 minutes. If you aren't in it, I call the FBI. Eleanor walked out of the suite, Thomas falling in step behind her, leaving Sebastian alone with the dying embers of his father's darkest legacy. 1 year later. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Manor had not seen a party like this in 2 decades. Under Beatrice's reign, the annual galas had been stiff, suffocating affairs where laughter felt like a contraband item. Under Eleanor's hand, the room was alive. The theme was New Horizons. The heavy velvet drapes had been pulled back to reveal the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the illuminated gardens. The guest list had changed, too. Gone were the sycophants and the corrupt politicians who used to crowd around Arthur, hoping for a favor. In their place were innovators, scholarship recipients, and the hard-working staff of Sterling Global, who had previously never been allowed past the service entrance. Eleanor stood at the top of the grand staircase. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, not black. She was done mourning. "She looks different," a voice whispered near the champagne fountain. "She looks like she owns the place," another replied. "She does own the place." Eleanor descended the stairs, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. She didn't walk with the tentative steps of the lonely wife anymore. She moved with the fluid grace of a woman who had survived the fire and forged herself in the heat. She made her way through the room, greeting board members by name. Sterling Global stock was up 18% since she took over. She had sold off the toxic assets, settled the Dubai lawsuits, quietly and expensively, but honestly, and pivoted the company toward renewable energy shipping. The nurse had diagnosed the company's cancer and cut it out. Near the orchestra, she saw a familiar face. Victoria looked tired. Her hands, holding a glass of sparkling water, were rougher than they used to be. Her nails were short, no longer manicured to lethal points. "Hello, Victoria," Eleanor said, stopping beside her. Victoria jumped slightly, then offered a weary smile. "Eleanor, quite a party. How is Napa?" "Hard," Victoria admitted, taking a sip of water. She had been sober for 11 months. "The harvest was difficult. We lost 20% to the frost. I had to be out there at 3 a.m. with the frost fans. I broke a heel in the mud." "But you saved the crop. Most of it," Victoria said. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes searching. "I actually made wine, Eleanor. I mean, I didn't just drink it. I made it. It tastes better this way." "I'm glad to hear that," Eleanor said sincerely. "Arthur would be proud." Victoria looked away, blinking back tears. "I don't know about that, but I'm proud and thank you for not cutting me off completely when you could have." "Family is complicated," Eleanor said softly. "Enjoy the evening, Victoria." She moved on. She hadn't forgiven them, not fully, but she had chosen not to carry the poison of revenge. That was Arthur's way, and it had killed him in the end. Then she saw Beatrice. Beatrice hadn't been invited, but she had come anyway. She sat at a corner table, clutching her purse, looking like a ghost haunting her own former life. No one was talking to her. The socialites she had ruled over for years now ignored her, drawn instead to the power radiating from Eleanor. Eleanor walked over. "Beatrice," Eleanor nodded. Beatrice looked up, Her face was a map of bitterness. "You changed the curtains?" she spat. "These are hideous." "They let the light in," Eleanor replied calmly. "Something this house has needed for a long time." "You think you've won," Beatrice hissed. "But you're still alone, Eleanor. You have no children. You have no history. When you die, who will remember you?" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was a smile of absolute peace. "The people I help will remember me, Beatrice. That's enough." Eleanor signaled a waiter. "Please bring Mrs. Sterling a glass of whatever she likes, and then call her a car. She looks tired." She walked away, leaving Beatrice alone with her spite. Beatrice had her $1 framed in a cheap plastic frame in her small apartment, a constant reminder of the love she never gave. Eleanor took the stage as the music died down. She adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she said. The room went silent. "A year ago, I stood in a lawyer's office and was told that I was nothing. I was told that because I didn't have the name, or the blood, or the ruthlessness of the Sterling legacy, I couldn't lead." She looked out at the crowd. "But leadership isn't about how loud you can scream, or how much you can steal. It's about care. It's about noticing the things others ignore. For years, I was the invisible wife. I sat in the corners. I listened. And because I listened, I learned." She paused. "Tonight, I am announcing the dissolution of the Sterling Family Trust as you knew it. In its place, we are launching the Arthur and Eleanor Initiative. We will be funding full scholarships for nursing and palliative care degrees for underprivileged students. And we are opening 3 new hospice centers in Seattle, free of charge to those who cannot pay." Thunderous applause broke out. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine. "We are not defined by what we inherit," Eleanor said, her voice ringing clear. "We are defined by what we build from the ashes. Thank you." As the applause washed over her, Eleanor stepped off the stage. Harrison Thorne was waiting for her at the bottom, holding a tablet. "Excellent speech, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "Also, we received an email from the Omaha branch." "Sebastian?" Eleanor asked, stopping. "Yes, it's a performance review from his supervisor. Apparently, he reorganized the loading dock schedule and increased efficiency by 15%. He asked if he could come home for Christmas." Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the man who had tried to blackmail her. She thought about the scared boy she had seen in the hotel room. "Tell him," Eleanor said slowly, "that if he keeps his numbers up through Q4, he can come for dinner. But he sleeps at a hotel." Thorne smiled. "Very good, Mum." Eleanor walked out onto the balcony. The rain had started again, the classic Seattle drizzle. She took a deep breath of the cool air. She was 35 years old. She was a billionaire. She was the CEO of a global empire. She looked down at her ring finger. She still wore Arthur's ring, but on her right hand now. She wasn't the lonely wife anymore. She was Eleanor. And for the first time in her life, when she looked out at the horizon, she didn't see a shadow. She saw only light. And that is the incredible story of Eleanor Sterling. She proved that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should fear the most, and the one who deserves the most respect. The family thought they could crush her because she was just a nurse, but they forgot that nurses are the ones who clean up the mess, handle the pain, and hold the hand of death without blinking. Eleanor burned the black book because she knew true power doesn't come from blackmail. It comes from integrity. She saved the company by destroying its dark past. So here is my question for you. If you were Eleanor, would you have burned that book, or would you have kept it for protection? And would you have invited Sebastian back for Christmas? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a lottery winner whose husband tried to hide the ticket. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you underestimate.